I remember the exact second my mother's voice went flat. The room smelled like old paper and peppermint tea. My phone trembled in my hand as she said the words that split my life in two. Grandpa died. The lawyer says we get everything. You get nothing. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I smiled because right then someone shifted beside me on the couch. The cushion dipped, a familiar weight, a breath I knew better than my own, and a whisper that shouldn't have been possible brushed my ear. Don't say a word yet. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had felt erased by family. Hundreds of strangers saying the same thing in different words. They smiled while cutting me out. That's when I knew I had to tell this story from the beginning, before the phone call, before the will, before the lie that cost me years. It starts with my grandfather's house. Not the house you imagine, not some grand estate with iron gates and chandeliers. It was a narrow, stubborn place that leaned into the wind like it refused to leave. White paint peeling, floorboards that sang when you walked, the kind of house that remembered you. When I was a kid, he'd let me sit on the kitchen counter and stir soup that tasted like patience. He called me Little Anchor because, he said, I kept him steady. My parents hated that. They never said it outright, but resentment has a smell, cold, metallic. They showed up on holidays with forced smiles, stayed just long enough to be seen, and left before the dishes cooled. Grandpa noticed everything. He noticed how my mother corrected him in public, how my father counted rooms instead of memories, how they asked questions about paperwork instead of his health. When I turned 18, Grandpa called me into the study, the room where dust floated like time itself had slowed down. He closed the door. He didn't sit. That's how I knew it mattered. You need to know something, he said, and you need to promise you won't repeat it. I promised. He told me he'd updated his will. Not everything, just enough to protect what mattered to him, the house, the savings he'd built coin by coin. He said family wasn't blood, it was behavior, and behavior, he'd learned, needed boundaries. I begged him not to tell me. He insisted, because when people feel entitled, they lie loudest when they're scared. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at my ceiling, hearing my parents' laughter from the living room. I wondered what they'd say if they knew. I wondered how long love lasts when money enters the room. Years passed. Life happened. I moved closer to Grandpa. I drove him to appointments, sat with him when the news was bad and the silence was worse. He told me stories he'd never told anyone, about war, about regret, about the one decision he wished he'd taken back, trusting people who only showed up when they wanted something. Then the call started. My mother suddenly sweet, my father suddenly curious. How's Grandpa doing, they'd ask, like it hadn't been years since they cared. They offered help, they offered opinions, they offered pressure. One night, after a long day, Grandpa gripped my wrist with surprising strength. He said, if something happens, they will come for you first. They will say I forgot you. They will say I changed my mind. They will say anything. Nothing's going to happen, I told him. He smiled like someone who knew better. The hospital room was too bright the last time. Machines hummed. He squeezed my hand and whispered, sit with me. I did. He closed his eyes. The world kept going anyway. The funeral was a performance. My mother cried on cue. My father shook hands like he was closing deals. People told me how lucky I was to have known him. No one asked how it felt to lose the one person who had never lied to me. The call came 3 days later. I sat on the couch, same dent in the cushion from where Grandpa always sat. My mother didn't waste time. She said, the lawyer called. It's all very clear. I waited. We get everything, she continued. The house, the accounts. He must have forgotten to update your part. It happens, you understand. I smiled, because the couch dipped, because the air changed, because I felt his presence like a hand on my shoulder. You hear that? He whispered. That's fear pretending to be certainty. I said nothing. My mother kept talking, explaining, justifying, ending the conversation with a kindness that felt rehearsed. When the call ended, the room went silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat and the weight beside me that refused to move. I turned my head slowly. Don't confront them yet, he said, calm as ever. Let them show you who they are. I swallowed. How is this possible? He smiled because truth has a way of sitting with you when lies start walking. Outside, a car door slammed. Somewhere, paperwork was being signed. Somewhere, my parents were celebrating a victory they hadn't earned. And beside me, Grandpa leaned back on the couch, crossed his arms, and waited, like he knew exactly what was coming next. The first thing I learned about grief is that it sharpens your hearing. Every sound became louder after the funeral. The tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the way my parents' names lit up my phone like warning signs. I stopped answering their calls, not because I was angry, not yet, but because Grandpa was right there, sitting across from me, watching the world like he was waiting for someone to make the next wrong move. They'll rush, he said one evening, as if commenting on the weather. People who think they've won always rush. I didn't ask how he could be here. I didn't ask why I could hear him and no one else could. The presence felt natural, like memory with weight, like love refusing to leave. 2 days later, the lawyer called. His voice was clipped, professional, just warm enough to sound trustworthy. There seems to be some confusion, he said. Your parents informed us you're contesting the will. I haven't said anything, I replied. There was a pause, a recalibration. Well, perhaps it would be best if you came in. Grandpa leaned forward. There it is. The office smelled like lemon polish and old secrets. Diplomas lined the walls. My parents were already there when I arrived, sitting too close together, hands folded, eyes fixed on me like I was late to my own trial. My mother smiled first. We didn't think you'd come. I didn't think you'd call, I said. The lawyer cleared his throat. He slid a thin folder across the table, stopping just short of my fingertips. According to the documents we have, he began, the estate transfers entirely to Mr. and Mrs. And the addendum? I asked. My father's jaw tightened. What addendum? The lawyer blinked. There is no addendum on file. I looked at my parents. My mother's smile cracked just slightly, like porcelain under pressure. Sweetheart, your grandfather was confused near the end. He talked about a lot of things that never happened. Grandpa stood behind her chair, his hand hovering inches above her shoulder. Watch closely. This is where they test how much you remember. I stood up. Then show me the full file, I said to the lawyer. Every page, every revision. The lawyer hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. After a moment, he stood and left the room. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone with the people who raised me. You don't need to do this, my father said quietly. Families shouldn't fight over money. I laughed. It surprised even me. You already are. My mother reached for my hand. I pulled away. We gave up a lot to take care of him. Time, energy. We deserve this. You visited him 3 times last year. Once was to ask about the house. Her eyes went cold. Careful. Grandpa leaned close to my ear. There's the real voice. The lawyer returned, this time with a thicker folder. He avoided my parents' eyes as he placed it on the table. There was an addendum, he admitted. It was filed separately, at the request of your grandfather. My father shot to his feet. "That's impossible." The lawyer opened the folder. My name stared back at me in black ink. Not everything, but enough. The house, a portion of the accounts, clear instructions, witness signatures. My mother's face drained of color. "He wouldn't do this," she whispered. "Not to us." "He did," I said. Silence swallowed the room. Then my father laughed, a short, sharp sound. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "We'll contest it." Grandpa straightened. "Now listen." Over the next few weeks, my life became a series of envelopes and phone calls, legal threats disguised as concern, relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly asking how I was doing. Everyone had an opinion, everyone had advice. No one asked what Grandpa wanted because they already knew and didn't like the answer. At night, I sat in his house alone, the house that now technically belonged to me. I ran my fingers along the walls, remembering the height marks he'd carved when I was growing. Grandpa sat in his old chair, watching me with something like pride. "They're scared. That makes people sloppy." One evening, a knock rattled the door. I didn't answer. The knock came again, harder. "It's us," my mother called. "We need to talk." I opened the door just enough to see their faces. My father's expression was tight, controlled. My mother's eyes were red, not from crying, but from anger. "We know you've been meeting with the lawyer," she said. "So have you," I replied. She stepped forward. "You don't understand what you're doing." Grandpa stood beside me. "Neither do they." My father lowered his voice. "If you don't back out, things will get complicated." I felt the threat settle in my chest like a stone. "Is that supposed to scare me?" "It's supposed to help you," he said. I closed the door. That night, Grandpa didn't sit, he paced. "They won't stop," he said. "Not now." "What happens next?" I asked. He looked at me, serious. "They'll try to rewrite the story, and when that fails, they'll try to erase you from it." The next morning, my phone exploded with messages, screenshots, accusations, a post circulating online, written by my mother, painting me as manipulative, greedy, a liar who had taken advantage of an old man. My name trended in a circle I never wanted to be famous in. I stared at the screen, numb. Grandpa placed a hand over mine. "This is where most people break, but this is also where truth starts fighting back." Before I could respond, another notification appeared, a voicemail from the lawyer. He said, "Something's wrong. Documents have gone missing, and I think your parents know more than they're admitting." The room felt suddenly smaller. Grandpa met my eyes. "I told you," he said softly, "they'd show you who they are." And as I listened to the voicemail again, I realized this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about what they were willing to destroy to keep it. The hardest part wasn't being lied about. It was realizing how easily people believed it. I watched the comments stack up under my mother's post like bricks in a wall being built around me. Distant cousins, old neighbors, friends of friends, people who had smiled at me at the funeral, now typing things they'd never dare say to my face. Ungrateful, greedy. You can tell who someone really is when money's involved. Grandpa stood behind me as I scrolled. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. "This is why I didn't want you in the room when I changed the will," he said quietly. "I knew they'd make you the villain. It's easier than admitting they failed." I shut the phone off. My hands were shaking, but my mind felt eerily calm, like something inside me had finally locked into place. "They're trying to scare me into backing out," I said. "Yes," he replied, "and they're also trying to isolate you." That part landed hard, because it was working. Friends stopped replying. Invitations disappeared. One cousin sent a long message about family unity that somehow blamed me entirely. I started questioning my own memories. Had I imagined the neglect, the comments Grandpa made, the way my parents only showed interest when money was mentioned? Late that night, the lawyer called again. They accessed the safe deposit box, he said without preamble. My stomach dropped. How? They had a copy of an old authorization form, technically valid, though ethically questionable. What was in the box? I asked, already knowing the answer. Personal papers, notes, a handwritten letter addressed to you. The room went cold. Grandpa closed his eyes. That letter was insurance, he said. They weren't supposed to find it yet. Yet? I echoed. The lawyer continued. They claim the letter proves your grandfather was manipulated, that you coerced him into changing the will. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. So now I'm a criminal. They haven't filed anything formal, he said, but they're preparing. After the call ended, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch. Grandpa lowered himself beside me. I wrote that letter for when they crossed the line, he said. Looks like they sprinted. Then why am I not allowed to see it? I asked. He met my eyes. Because it doesn't just explain what I did, it explains why. The days that followed blurred together. Every knock at the door made my heart race. I started keeping the lights off at night, not because I was hiding, but because I needed to think. One afternoon, as rain traced crooked lines down the windows, Grandpa asked me a question that changed everything. Have they ever apologized to you? I opened my mouth, closed it. No, I admitted. Not once, he said, and they won't start now, so stop waiting for it. The next legal meeting was worse. My parents arrived with a new attorney, younger, sharper, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. He spoke in smooth, practiced phrases about undue influence and emotional dependency. They were building a case. My mother dabbed at her eyes at just the right moments. My father stared straight ahead, like this was all terribly inconvenient but necessary. I sat there, listening to my life being reframed as a strategy. Grandpa stood behind the new attorney, arms crossed. He noticed how they never say my name, just the deceased. Makes it easier. When it was my turn to speak, the room felt too quiet. I loved my grandfather, I said simply. I took care of him because he asked me to, not because I expected anything. The younger attorney smiled. Love can still manipulate, he replied. That's when something inside me snapped. I have text messages, voicemails, years of proof showing who showed up and who didn't. My mother's head snapped toward me. You wouldn't do it. Grandpa leaned forward. Do it. The meeting ended abruptly after that. Outside, my father grabbed my arm. You think this makes you strong? He hissed. You're tearing this family apart. I pulled free. You did that long before me. That night, Grandpa didn't speak for a long time. He watched me pace, watched the storm outside. You're close now, he finally said. To what? The truth they're most afraid of. I stopped. Which is? That this was never about money. It was about control. A week later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of the letter, the one from the safe deposit box. My name at the top, in Grandpa's handwriting. My hands trembled as I read the first line. If you're reading this, it means they've already lied about me. I looked up, heart pounding. Grandpa's expression was unreadable. Now, he said softly, you understand why they panicked. I turned the page. And that's when I realized my parents hadn't just taken something from me. They'd uncovered something that could destroy them. I didn't finish the letter in one sitting, not because it was long, but because every paragraph felt like a door opening to a room I had lived in my whole life without realizing it had walls. Grandpa's handwriting was steady, calm. the way he always spoke when you wanted the truth to land without resistance. "They will say I was confused," the letter read. "They will say I was pressured. They will say I didn't know what I was doing. That's how people rewrite history when it doesn't serve them." My throat tightened. Grandpa stood across from me, silent now, letting his own words do the work. The letter wasn't angry. That was the most terrifying part. It was precise. Dates, incidents, conversations he had documented quietly over years. Times my parents demanded financial information. Times they tried to limit who visited him. One moment burned into my chest described the night my mother told him, word for word, that children who don't obey don't deserve inheritance. I remembered that night. I'd been in the kitchen. I'd heard my name. I'd heard my mother's voice sharpen, and I'd chosen to stay quiet, convincing myself it wasn't my place. I folded the letter slowly. "They knew this existed," I said. Grandpa nodded. "They hoped they could control it." The next morning, my phone rang before sunrise. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "You think you're clever," my mother said, skipping the greeting, "playing games, digging up the past. I didn't dig anything up. You did." A pause. Then, "You don't understand the damage you're about to cause." "I understand it perfectly," I said. "You're just not used to being the ones exposed." Her voice dropped. "If that letter ever sees daylight, you will lose what little family you have left." I smiled without meaning to. Grandpa noticed. "He's bargaining," he murmured. I hung up. The lawyer called an emergency meeting that afternoon. This time, my parents didn't look confident. They looked rushed, like people who realized too late they were running out of time. Their attorney tried a new angle: settlement, a generous one, more money, faster resolution, all framed as an act of peace. "Why now?" I asked. My father leaned forward. "Because we're tired," he said, "and so are you." Grandpa let out a quiet laugh. "That's fear," he said. "You can hear it cracking." "I'll consider it," I said aloud, "after full disclosure." My mother stiffened. "Disclosure of what?" "Everything," I said. "The safe deposit box, the missing documents, the online post, all of it." The meeting ended without agreement. That evening, I returned to the house earlier than usual. The front door was unlocked. That stopped me cold. I stepped inside slowly. The air felt wrong, disturbed, drawers open, papers scattered, the study door ajar. Someone had been inside. Grandpa was suddenly beside me, his presence sharp. They crossed another line. I rushed to the study. The filing cabinet was open, empty. My chest tightened. "They took something." Grandpa nodded once. "The originals." I sank into the chair, heart racing. "What do we do now?" He placed a hand on the desk. "Now you stop reacting." I looked up. "And do what?" "You let them think they've won, because people make their biggest mistakes in celebration." That night, I posted nothing, said nothing, answered no calls. The silence was unbearable and effective. By the third day, my cousin messaged me privately, then another, then an old family friend. Questions started replacing accusations. "Is it true they went into your house? Did they really take documents? Why is your mom panicking?" Grandpa watched it unfold like a chessboard. "They're leaking," he said. "They don't even know it." On the fourth day, the lawyer called, his voice strained. "They submitted copies of the documents they took, but there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" I asked. "They don't match the versions on file. Dates are off. Signatures don't align." I closed my eyes. "They forged them," I whispered. Grandpa's voice was steady. "And now they're trapped." That night, my father showed up at the house, alone. He didn't knock. He stood on the porch like someone waiting for judgment. When I opened the door, his shoulders sagged. "We need to talk." Behind me, Grandpa stood tall. "Be careful," he said softly. "This is where the story flips." My father stepped inside, eyes darting around the house like it might accuse him. "We didn't mean for this to go so far. Your mother is not well." I folded my arms. "You broke my house." He flinched. "We were desperate." "For what? Money or control?" He didn't answer. Outside, a car slowed, then stopped. Headlights cut through the living room window. Grandpa turned his head toward the light. "They're here," he said. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the lawyer. "Police have been contacted. Forgery suspected. Do not engage." I looked back at my father, standing in Grandpa's house, surrounded by the truth he tried to steal. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about exposing them anymore. It was about what they were willing to do next. The police lights painted the living room in slow pulses of red and blue. My father didn't move at first. He just stared at the wall where Grandpa's old photographs hung, black and white moments frozen in time, weddings, birthdays, a younger version of the man standing silently behind me now. "You called them?" my father asked, his voice barely audible. "No," I said. "You did, the moment you forged those documents." The knock came, firm, official. 2 officers stepped inside, polite but alert. They asked names, asked questions, asked my father to step outside. He didn't look at me as they guided him toward the door, not once. The house exhaled when it closed behind him. I sank onto the couch, my legs suddenly weak. Grandpa sat beside me, the cushion dipping like it always did. "You did well," he said. "I didn't do anything," I replied. "I just stopped protecting them." "That's the hardest thing," he said. "Children are taught to carry their parents' shame. You finally put it down." The next 24 hours were chaos. My mother left 12 voicemails, some furious, some pleading, one sobbing apology that sounded more afraid than sorry. I didn't respond to any of them. The lawyer called twice, once to confirm the investigation, once to warn me. "They're not done," he said. "Exposure makes people reckless." By morning, the story had shifted online. Not vanished, but fractured. Screenshots appeared, timestamps. A neighbor posted about seeing my parents' car outside the house late at night. Someone leaked the police report. The comments turned cautious, then curious, then suspicious. Grandpa watched it all unfold with a strange calm. He said, "Truth doesn't rush. It waits until lies collapse under their own weight." That afternoon, my mother finally came. Not raging, not shouting, quiet. She stood in the doorway, smaller somehow, like the house itself was rejecting her. "I just want to understand," she said. Grandpa stood between us. "Now she wants truth," he murmured, "when it's too late to control it." I let her in. She didn't sit. She walked slowly through the living room, touching nothing, avoiding the study. "I never thought it would go this far," I replied. "You broke into the house. You accused me of manipulation. You forged documents." Her jaw tightened. "We did what we had to." I felt something in me go still. "That's not an explanation. That's a confession." She looked up sharply. For a moment, I saw fear, not of me, but of what I might say next. "You don't know what it's like," whispered, "living your whole life believing something would be yours, counting on it." Grandpa shook his head. "Entitlement is not loss." I met her eyes. "You were never promised anything." She swallowed. "He was my father." "And he was my grandfather. The difference is, I listened." Silence stretched between us. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Do you still have the letter?" I didn't answer. Her shoulders slumped. If you release it, we're finished, she said. I thought of all the times I'd been finished in her mind long before this, the dismissals, the conditions, the love that came with rules. You already finished yourselves, I said. She left without another word. That night I dreamed of Grandpa's house as it once was, warm, full, alive. I woke with the sense that something was coming to an end. The lawyer confirmed it the next day. They want to settle, he said, immediately. No contest, no appeals. And the criminal side? I asked. He paused. It depends on what you do next. Grandpa looked at me carefully. This is the moment, he said, not of revenge, but of choice. I walked through the house alone that evening, the kitchen, the hallway, the study where Grandpa used to read with his glasses slipping down his nose. I sat at his desk and opened the drawer where I'd found old notes years ago. There was a final envelope, unmarked. Inside was a second letter, shorter, written later. If you're reading this, it said, it means you stood your ground. I'm proud of you. Whatever you choose next, make sure it's for your peace, not their punishment. I folded the letter carefully. Outside, my phone buzzed again. A message from my mother. Please, before you decide anything, meet us together. I stared at the screen. Grandpa placed a hand on my shoulder. They want one last chance to rewrite the ending. I asked, do they deserve it? He smiled sadly. That's not the question. The question is, do you? I looked around the house, the memories, the silence, the truth finally breathing, and I realized whatever happened next would decide more than inheritance. It would decide what kind of person I became after all of this. My phone buzzed again. Tonight, the message read, we tell you everything. I closed my eyes. Because some truths don't heal you. They test whether you're strong enough to hear them. They chose a restaurant halfway between the house and the city. Public ground, public, safe. That alone told me everything. I arrived early and sat with my back to the wall, watching reflections move across the darkened windows. Grandpa stood beside me, not sitting this time. He was alert, focused in a way I'd only seen once before, years ago, when a man tried to pressure him into selling the house. They'll confess, he said quietly, but not the way you expect. My parents walked in together, not side by side, just close enough to look united. My mother spotted me first. Her smile appeared too quickly, like muscle memory kicking in before thought. My father followed her gaze, his face unreadable. They sat. No hugs, no small talk. My mother folded her hands. Thank you for coming. I nodded once. You said you'd tell me everything. My father exhaled through his nose. We need you to understand the context. Grandpa's jaw tightened. There he is. My mother spoke first. After Grandpa retired, things changed. He became stubborn, suspicious. He started rewriting history. I leaned back slightly. Or he started paying attention. Her eyes flashed. You think you know better than us? Yes, I said, because I was there. My father finally spoke. We were drowning. The word hung between us. Drowning in what? I asked. In expectations, he said, in plans we'd already made. We thought the house would be sold, that the money would help us reset. We counted on it. You counted on his death, I said flatly. Her mother flinched. That's not fair. No, it's accurate. She pressed her lips together, then leaned forward. We didn't forge those documents to steal. We did it to correct what he'd been manipulated into doing. Grandpa laughed, not loud, not cruel, just disappointed. He warned you they'd say that, I said. My father's eyes snapped to me. Warned you? I held his gaze. He documented everything. Silence. The waiter appeared, sensed the tension, and retreated without taking an order. My mother's voice softened. "You always were his favorite." There it was. Not denial, not apology, resentment. "You replaced us," she continued. "You became the child he listened to, and when he stopped listening to us, we panicked." Grandpa stepped closer to the table. "They're finally telling the truth," he murmured, "just not the part where they admit fault." I took a slow breath. "You accused me of manipulation, you broke into the house, you forged legal documents, and now you want understanding." My father rubbed his temples. "We're asking for mercy." That word hit harder than any accusation. "Mercy," I repeated. "Yes," my mother said quickly. "If you release that letter, if you let this go public, your father could lose everything, his job, his reputation." I tilted my head. "You didn't care about mine." Her mouth opened, closed. Grandpa placed both hands on the table, leaning in. "Now watch. This is the pivot." My father straightened. "We're offering a compromise," he said. "You keep the house, a portion of the money. We walk away clean. No charges, no statements." "And the truth?" I asked. He hesitated, just long enough. "You don't get to buy silence," I said. My mother's eyes filled, not with tears, but with fury. "You think you're better than us now?" "No," I said quietly. "I think I'm finally free of you." The words surprised even me. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "If you do this," she hissed, "you will be alone." Grandpa smiled. I looked up at her. "I've been alone my whole life. I just didn't realize it until now." She stared at me, searching for the child she could control. She didn't find them. My father spoke one last time. "If you go through with this," he said, "there's no going back." I nodded. "Good." They left without another word. I stayed seated long after they were gone. My hands were steady. My chest felt light. Grandpa sat across from me now, the chair creaking under a weight no one else could see. "You did it," he said. "Did I?" I asked, because it feels like something worse is coming. He didn't deny it. They won't stop trying to protect themselves. On the way home, my phone rang. The lawyer. "They filed an emergency motion," he said, "claiming coercion, elder abuse. They're pushing for an injunction." My stomach tightened. "Based on what?" He hesitated. "A witness." I pulled the car over. "What witness?" "Someone claims you pressured your grandfather in his final months. Someone close." I closed my eyes. Grandpa's voice dropped. "I was wondering when they'd use that." "Who?" I asked. The lawyer answered before Grandpa could. "Your cousin, the one who stayed with him briefly last year." My grip tightened on the steering wheel, because that cousin had only heard one version of events, the version my parents fed them. Grandpa looked at me with something like apology. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this," he said. "Come to what?" I asked. "To the part where you have to choose between staying quiet and burning the last bridge completely." I stared out at the dark road ahead. Some endings don't come softly. Some arrive like a storm, forcing you to decide whether you'll stand in it or finally step out of the path it's been carving through your life. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. Every bench, every polished surface felt designed to drain warmth from anyone who entered. I sat at the defense table alone. My parents sat across the aisle together, whispering, rehearsing, bracing. My cousin sat behind them, eyes fixed forward, jaw tight, avoiding me. Grandpa stood beside me, not seated, not relaxed, focused. "This is where masks fall," he said quietly. Pay attention to who hesitates. The judge entered. The room rose, then silence, heavy, expectant. The motion was read aloud. Allegations of coercion, emotional manipulation, elder abuse. My name spoken like a liability. My cousin was called first. They walked to the stand stiffly, swore the oath, and sat. Their hands trembled just slightly, enough to notice if you were looking for it. My parents' attorney guided them gently, carefully. Can you describe your relationship with your grandfather in his final year? Yes. And the defendant, how often were they present? Almost constantly. Did that concern you? Yes. Grandpa leaned closer to me. Listen to the language, he whispered. Concern is not evidence. The attorney pressed on. Did your grandfather ever express fear, confusion, pressure? My cousin hesitated. Just for a second. Yes, they said. My mother exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. Then it was our turn. My attorney stood, calm, precise. Did my client ever instruct you to say anything today? No. Did my client ever prevent you from seeing your grandfather? No. Did my client ever discuss the will with you? No. The attorney paused. Then what exactly led you to believe coercion occurred? My cousin swallowed. My aunt told me Grandpa said he felt trapped. Grandpa's jaw tightened. The attorney nodded. Your aunt, not your grandfather. Silence. The judge leaned forward slightly. Then my attorney said the words that changed everything. Your Honor, we'd like to submit evidence. A folder was handed over. My mother stiffened. My father's face drained of color. Grandpa straightened beside me. Inside the folder were audio transcripts, voicemails, saved automatically to cloud storage my parents had forgotten about. Messages they'd left Grandpa when they thought no one else would ever hear them. If you don't fix this, we'll handle it ourselves. You owe us. Don't make us look like villains. The courtroom shifted. My cousin's head snapped up. My mother whispered, That's impossible. Then came the letter. Not the one they stole, the second one, the private one. My attorney read it aloud. I am of sound mind. I am not pressured. I am not afraid of my grandchild. I am afraid of my own children and what they will do when they realize control no longer works. The judge closed his eyes briefly. Grandpa let out a slow breath. There it is, he said. My parents' attorney stood quickly. Objection. Denied, the judge said. Sit down. For the first time, my mother looked at me not with anger, not with calculation, but with panic. The judge turned to my cousin. Did you know about these messages? They shook their head. Did you hear your grandfather say any of this yourself? No. The judge nodded slowly, then turned to my parents. Do you deny the authenticity of these recordings? My father's mouth opened, closed. My mother reached for his hand. Too late. The judge sighed. This court finds no evidence of coercion by the defendant. However, they looked directly at my parents. There is sufficient cause to refer this matter for further investigation. The gavel struck. Once. Twice. My legs felt weak. My parents didn't look at me as they were escorted out to speak with officers. My cousin stayed seated, staring straight ahead, like their world had just split in two. The courtroom emptied slowly. Grandpa didn't move. You okay? He asked. I nodded, but the truth was more complicated. Because winning didn't feel like triumph, it felt like release mixed with grief. Outside, cameras waited, questions shouted, my phone buzzed relentlessly, but none of it mattered, because inside, something had finally ended. I turned to Grandpa. What happens now? I asked. He smiled gently. Now comes the hardest part. What's that? Living without the weight they put on you and deciding who you are when no one's controlling the story anymore. I swallowed. Because the truth had burned the bridge completely. There was no family left to return to, only forward. And as we walked away from the courthouse, I felt it, clearer than ever. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment everything finally stopped hurting and started becoming mine. The house was quiet when we returned. Not the heavy, haunted quiet I'd grown used to, but something softer, settled, like the walls had finally exhaled. I stood in the doorway for a long time, keys still in my hand, listening to nothing. No phones ringing, no voices demanding, no fear waiting to ambush me when I sat down. Grandpa walked past me and into the living room, the place he always loved most. He looked around slowly like someone taking in a view for the last time, not with sadness, but with satisfaction. "You did what I hoped you would," he said. "I didn't save the family," I replied. He turned to me. "You saved yourself. Families that survive on silence aren't families, they're systems." I sat on the couch. Same spot, same dent. For the first time since the phone call, the cushion didn't dip beside me. That's when it hit. He was still there, but differently, lighter, like someone who finished what they came to do. I don't know who I am without all of this, the fighting, the fear, trying to be enough. Grandpa smiled gently. "That's because they taught you to define yourself by what you endured. Now you get to define yourself by what you choose." The days that followed were strangely calm. The legal process moved forward without me. Statements were issued, the truth settled where it belonged. Some relatives reached out, not to apologize, but to explain. I didn't answer most of them, not out of anger, out of clarity. I spent time in the house instead, fixing small things Grandpa had always meant to get to, replacing a loose stair, repainting the window frame, letting sunlight in. One evening I found myself in the study again. I sat at his desk, opened the drawer, and placed both letters inside, side by side. Not as weapons, as reminders. That night, Grandpa came to me one last time, not standing, not watching, sitting, peaceful. "You won't need me much longer," he said. My throat tightened. "Don't say that." He chuckled. "I'm not leaving. I'm just not carrying things for you anymore." I nodded slowly. "I'm scared." "I know. That's how you know this is yours now." I thought about my parents, about the courtroom, about the years I'd spent trying to earn love that was always conditional. "What if I become bitter?" I asked. He shook his head. "Bitter people cling. You let go." The room felt warm, familiar. "You were never meant to inherit money. You were meant to inherit perspective." I felt tears then, but not the breaking kind, the healing kind. "I love you," I whispered. "I know. That's why this worked." When I woke the next morning, the house felt different, empty but not lonely, finished. Weeks later, I posted a single video, no names, no accusations, just the story, my story, about inheritance, about betrayal, about the lie that automatically blood equals loyalty. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments, strangers saying the same thing in different ways. I thought I was alone. This gave me permission to walk away. I finally understand it wasn't my fault. I read every one. And I smiled, because the real inheritance wasn't the house, it wasn't the money, it was the moment I stopped shrinking to fit into someone else's version of family. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. You are not required to sacrifice your truth to keep someone else comfortable. You are not ungrateful for protecting yourself, and walking away from manipulation is not betrayal, it's survival. Some people will only love you when you are controllable. Let them go. And if you've ever been told you get nothing while the truth is sitting right beside you, trust the truth. It never really leaves.